Can you log on? Can you
I'll ask colleagues for screens on, please. I'll ask the clerk to confirm quorum.
You have quorum, Your Worship. Councillor Hamou is just entering. Councillor Cassidy and Councillor Sully have not yet entered.
Okay, just let us know when they arrive, just for the benefit of all. Like to welcome you to this virtual meeting held during the COVID-19 emergency. I would invite the public to check the city's website for current details of COVID-19 service impacts. Meetings can be viewed via live streaming on YouTube and the city's website. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. Colleagues, I will look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to declare a conflict. It's in the third report of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee, specifically number 11, which is 4.9, the seventh report of the Governance Working Group, and specifically in there, section A6. So if I could have section A6 called separately, it deals with childcare, and my wife operates a childcare operation.
So noted. Thank you. Any other declarations? Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. I will declare a conflict on the third report of the Sppc, number 4.1, and number 8, 4.6, as I am a member of the LDBA, and the LDBA has financial implications on these matters.
Thank you very much. Any other declarations? All right, thank you kindly. I've not been made aware of any recognitions nor confidential matters to be considered in public. So I'll look for a motion to move item 4, confidential session, into after stage 13 bylaws. I'll look for a mover, Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Let's call the vote on that. All council members are in full attendance for the benefit of colleagues to know.
Councillors Cassidy and Sully.
Apologies, haven't signed into eScribe yet. I vote yay.
I'll vote yay. It hasn't come up on my screen, the vote option.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Closing the vote. Motion carries 15-0.
Thank you. I'll turn your attention to item 5, the minutes of our last meeting held on January 25th. For that, I'll look for a mover and seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Pelosi, seconded by Councillor Hamou. Any discussion? I see none. We'll call the question.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
I'll vote yay. For some reason, I'm still in February 8th, so I need to go into the future.
It was a good day. Thank you.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Colleagues, under communications and petitions, the draft climate emergency action plan, we have communication from C. Hansen, President, EVP and President of Enbridge, and we'll look for that to be moved into the appropriate component of the SPPC meeting. And for that, I'll look for a mover and seconder. Please, moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Let's call the vote.
Yay on this one until I log in.
Thank you.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
So item 7, there are no motions to which notice has been given. So that turns us to our reports. 8.1, the third report of the Community Protective Services Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will put the entire report on the floor. I have not heard from anyone about pulling any matters.
Does anyone wish to have any item dealt with separately? Back to you, Councillor Cassidy.
It was a pretty quick meeting. We heard from staff and from 2 delegations, one from Peter Roselot of Mission Services London and Mr. Diaktis for the Center of Hope Salvation Army. It was about doing emergency shelter services a little bit differently. There was an RFP that staff had issued, but it had been canceled because of difficulty in getting respondents to the RFP to meet the requirements of the RFP and actually fulfill within the budget that had been approved by council previously. So it was a pretty good and robust discussion on this item, and hopefully people were able to tune in or at least see the tape later on. So with that, I will put the entire report on the floor.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? See none, we'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thank you. Now for the third report of Corporate Services Committee, I'll call on Councillor Lewis, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. For the third report of Corporate Services Committee, I will move everything except item 3 on the council agenda. That was 2.2 on the committee agenda. That's the considerations and viability to the implementation of a vacant home tax in London. Deal with that one separately. I'll put everything else on the floor.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to have any other item dealt with separately? Councillor Lewis.
I think we can call the vote then, Your Worship.
You have no other comments on your committee?
No.
All right, thank you. Any other comments on any item except 2.2? Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. For the report on the shifts based on assessment growth, I just wanted to ask through the mayor about what the outlook is for the reassessment cycle, which has been postponed. Reassessment's been postponed by AMPAC and the province for a few years now. And myself, I'm concerned about every year that goes by and the changes in market value are happening. They're just not being recorded as changes in assessed value. It's starting to become a long time since 2016. And I wonder if staff can just give us a sense of what they expect to happen in terms of MPAC's reassessment cycle, when we think that will resume, and what that might mean for our residents.
Thank you. Let's check with staff. Ms. Barbone, would you be handling that?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. So at this point in time, we understand that they are looking to do valuations in 2023 with the implementation of that in 2024, the start of the 4-year phase-in. We're still waiting on confirmation of that, but that's at this point what we believe will occur. So 2024, we believe at this point would be the first time that you would see the reassessment take effect, and that they would have a full communication campaign and opportunities for people to look at their reassessments prior to that time. So certainly we're trying to get more information and would be looking to have a report as part of the tax policy to give a further update likely at the end of March or April.
Councillor Hummer?
Thank you. I just want to briefly follow up on that, and I appreciate that we'll be updated as we go, and if we don't know the answer to this question, that's fine. We can see if we figure it out later. Are they still planning, do you know, Ms. Barbone, to have the 4-year phase-in? Because we're now be looking at, if it's 2024, we're looking at 8 years of change being implemented over a 4-year cycle, which would be quite a lot. So I wonder if you know, are they thinking 4 years, or are they maybe going to extend it to a 5-year phase-in or a 6-year phase-in?
Ms. Barbone?
Thank you. Through the chair. I don't know with certainty what they're planning to do. I believe that is part of the strategy they're still looking at to understand what the impacts could be. I mean, generally what you see is that there tend to be potential shifts between classes as the impact that it, in terms of severity, but all things being equal, the impact on the taxes per se is really across classes. So we can certainly continue to have conversations with the ministry to see if there's anything that we could learn from that, and certainly report back, but I'm not aware of a final decision on that if it was going to change.
Councillor Hummer?
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Morgan?
Yes, further to Councillor Helmer's comments and what the treasurer just said, I do think that this is something that's important to keep our mind on. The province obviously needs to have a plan when they unpause the freezing of impact valuations. And I think the big question mark that concerns me is not having a sense on if there have been any significant shifts between the different tax classes that we have in the City of London. Obviously, if they all appreciate it at the same rate, that's not going to make much of a difference. But if there's been dramatic shifts between, say, residential and commercial, that's going to shift the tax burden in a way that could be concerning, particularly given the limitations we have on adjusting the tax ratios within some of the classes to mitigate that, if it's even desirable in the first place. So I think I'm glad to hear the treasurer say we'll keep in contact with the ministry on it, but anything we can do to ensure that the province is going to be very clear about what their plan is well in advance, so that we know where it is. And at any time we can start to figure out what the shifts have been between tax classes would be beneficial as well, which we may have to just wait until they actually do the assessments to find out. But I think there's a lot of speculation around that from different types of tax class owners that I've heard as well. So just some comments and thoughts, but it may be something that becomes important in our government lobbying as well, to keep on top of this, to figure out what the plan will be.
Thank you. Appreciate comments from all. Any other comments from colleagues? I see none. So with the exception of item 2.2, we will call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
2.2 was a divided vote at committee, so I had intended to pull it anyway so that those who did not support it could continue to do so. But following the committee meetings, there's also been some discussions with civic administration just around direction, providing a little bit more clarity and direction on what the RFP would entail. And so Councillor Cassidy and I circulated an amendment this afternoon to Part B of the committee recommendation, which in consultation with our administration would help them define the scope of the RFP. At this point, I think I'll look to Councillor Cassidy to see if she'd like to put that on the floor. And as I indicated in my email, Your Worship, I'm happy to second that.
Well, let's see if she would. Councillor Cassidy?
Yes, Your Worship, I'll move that, and I'll reserve comments for later on if necessary. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Councillor Lewis, you're seconding? All right, so noted. Comments or questions? Councillor Morgan, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, so I'll make some comments on this. I like the amendment. I think that the amendment tightens things up. It also recognizes that there may be multiple solutions to any challenges we find through the investigation. So I'll support the amendment, and I think that the recommendation coming out of committee was likely to be a much more expensive process if it was going to develop an entire plan. And I think that this is a much more logical two-step process where we identify what the challenge is, what the scope of it is in London, have someone come up with some possible solutions, and then return that to council for some decision making. So I'm very comfortable with this because it allows us to have a couple of exit points on the ramp and get a lot more information before we decide what the best path forward is. So my kudos to the councillors for adjusting this one. I think this makes a ton of sense.
Councillor Hammoud.
Thank you, Mayor Holder. I will also be supporting this. I didn't support it through committee because I was really worried about two things. The first thing was that I couldn't see how it fit with affordable housing, and I couldn't understand the linkage between a vacancy home tax and affordable housing. And I just couldn't wrap my mind around that. The second thing I had a problem with was the fact that the range was between 64 to 738 vacancies. And that's such a large range that I couldn't, it didn't make sense in my head. So with the numbers, like you can't have a stretch from 64 homes or vacant homes to like a range of 64 to 738 without kind of questioning things. So I'm hoping that staff will come back with a more, or this will go out to consultants to come back with a more robust kind of research on how many vacant homes we have in London.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. This is an interesting one. When I originally saw this, I thought, yeah, that's a great idea. But then as I read through the staff report, I had some serious concerns. As Councillor Hammoud said, for sure, quite a discrepancy between 54 homes that we currently show and projected homes. I was very concerned about the financial viability because even if it was at the high end of the homes projected, we'd still be only at a break-even point. I was also concerned about what is a vacant home, definitions of vacancies. There's many folks that winter away for more than 6 months. Would they be required to declare their home vacant? Or red tape, even if we go at the high number, 99.5% of homes in London are not vacant. So would they have to file a report every year saying that they're not vacant? We're not Vancouver or Toronto. I don't know if we have the same speculative commercial activity that those centers have or that are driving our homes up, our price of our homes up. However, I do have some vacancies in my ward, and I appreciate the amendment here, getting closer to identifying what's our true vacancy rate in London, and what's the best way to address it once we know the costs and what we're going to get in return for those costs. So I will support the amendment. But for sure look forward to a very detailed analysis by what comes back in terms of true numbers and true expected results for any investment we might make.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm a little intrigued by this one and also concerned at the same time. So perhaps through to staff, how exactly would this RFP work? It looks like this is not even just the preparation of the RFP, but the issuance of the RFP prior to it coming back to council, and that it would be no identified funding source at this point, that would be associated with it. I'm not sure if this is a straightforward task as it seems to enumerate the number of vacant homes within the city. The staff report goes into good detail about the difficulties in doing so without a regulatory framework in order to be able to achieve that. So perhaps through your worship to staff, if we could just get a little bit more explanation on how this might be accomplished, or if it could, or what the challenges with that might be.
Well, let's take that to staff. Mr. Baird, is that for you?
Ms. Barbone, I'd be
Go ahead,
happy to
please.
answer that. Thank you. So through the chair, this absolutely in other municipalities was one of the very first steps that was undertaken to start to do some work. It's been done to varying degrees. There are a number of different ways that this could be further investigated. There is detailed analysis of StatsCan data that is possible. There has been, among other municipalities, where they have done detailed analysis of electricity and water billings to determine what might pose a reasonable threshold for possible vacancies. Those are just the two that I know off the top of my head. So certainly the intent would be to validate how big a problem there is in the City of London and to get a much better estimate of what that vacancy rate is. That would certainly give council the sense of what and how big the issue may or may not be in the City of London. Certainly we know from tracking how many vacant homes create a problem, where we monitor and where we now have imposed the monetary penalties. That is a very small percentage. We know that there are others. The question is how big. The number that we came up with at the 0.5% is typically what other municipalities have approximately that have gone forward with more work have looked at. That seems, again, that's a range. We have not seen anybody actually implement, so we don't know how reasonable those estimates are. So this is absolutely a very good first step to give council an understanding of how big is the problem, and then based on how big the problem is, what potential targeted steps you could do to actually because it could be bylaw enforcement. It may not be the tax that you may wish to move if it's clearly the large majority is ones that are boarded up, etc. So this will give us a very good sense, and we know that many have done this across the province to look at this, and there are some good ways to begin that we would look to have a consultant do this work, and then we would bring that forward and report out to council.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you. So those are interesting and sound like fairly good methods. The 0.5% seem to have been gleaned by Ottawa and Vancouver, which was, and those are fairly markedly different markets than ours. I'd imagine it's kind of apples to oranges when we, I think my concern in all of this is that we haven't really identified this to be a problem in London. When this first came forward, I was very supportive. I thought, okay, this makes sense. But the reality is where our challenges are in London is in commercial properties, residential properties. We haven't really seen that as a big issue. We know it's a massive issue on commercial, but we don't have any tools to address it on the commercial side. We certainly do on the residential side. The next question is, once we identify that, is what tools do we use to shift those into habitable and occupiable properties? And through the report, it says those are pretty limited too. The amount of shift that we might anticipate is not large. And even if we did increase or place a tax on it, would that be incentive enough to move people to either selling their property or lessing it out to somebody for living in? Don't know. And so, the kind of the precondition when we asked staff to come back with a report on this, I said, yeah, let's do it. This absolutely makes a lot of sense. Let's see what's involved. And the post condition, we've got this report. And the case for that kind of evaporated underneath our feet, and it's not as strong. I'm very much a proponent of let's quantify the problem. So I have to be careful in saying, dismissing the idea of going to a consultant outright. But I'm very worried about what that cost might be, and if it was ever recoverable. But going to an RFP to find this information out might be helpful for other things beyond housing availability, and that's worth considering as well. But more so, I think probably where most of our housing that might be available for Londoners is sequestered is probably in the short-term accommodation market, and we don't discuss that at all here in Airbnbs and temporary rentals. Those help to support tourism to a degree, but certainly don't help to house the people in London who are looking for housing. And those in other municipalities have been massive pressures on the housing market and housing availability. And we haven't spent a lot of time talking about that. So I'll listen to a few of the arguments. I'm not really inclined to support going to this if we're going to be spending money on something that probably isn't recoverable. But again, it might be good data for us to have. So I certainly appreciate the work staff did to evaluate the options for us and the discussion that happened at committee.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I had some concerns about this as well. I'll support the amendment because it seems like it's an improvement to what came through committee. However, I might vote against B in the main motion. The table on page 27 of our report 4.4 is pretty clear that it's not that viable a program. There was a $2 million estimate for revenue, $2.1 million for administration. So we're losing money, and then $5.5 million just to start it up. And I looked at the 5.5 and I thought, wow, how many tiny homes could that purchase? Because I just this morning on a walk passed by someone who had built a shelter out of 4 pallets and a tarp and was emerging from that. So I see that there's ways that we could use this money that might be better than pursuing this. I would like to ask through you to staff, if it's not going to be a vacant housing tax, what are the other things we would be looking at?
Ms. Barbone.
Thank you, through the chair. So as I had said, indicated previously, based on the extent of the problem, there may be different solutions. So if the study were to show that the majority of the homes in London that are vacant are ones that are known and have property issues with them, the solution may be more bylaw enforcement, as an example. Certainly, if there's a large number of vacant homes and more than we might contemplate, then there may be a greater opportunity and ability to recover the cost of a program and supplement additional money for housing through a vacant residential tax. There may be other options depending on what the extent of the problem is. So this is definitely a smaller scope for an RFP. I expect that it would, likely around $100,000, probably a little less, if I had to hazard a guess, and that we can do it within existing funds, but that the intent of that would give us options to pursue as potential solutions based on the extent of the problem.
Councillor Van Holst.
Okay, thank you. $100,000. That's a bit of a hard sell for me, especially if it doesn't seem like there's many other options as out there. If it's going to turn out to be this vacant home tax, then I'm not sure I'm interested in that. Also, when I look at it, there's already a big penalty for having a vacant home, and that's the 99% of the tax that people would be paying. So we're looking at adding a 1% extra on there as sort of a fine by penalizing people. I don't know if that's significant enough to make a difference here in London. And I don't know about always using penalties to accomplish things. I noticed that the democracy index came out very recently, and Canada slipped from number 5 down 7 places to number 12 because of just more government interventions or overreach, largely to do with COVID. But here we are making more interventions that, for the most part, we collect a bunch of money and we use it to pay our administration. And I don't think that works out well for the residents here. I'd rather just take the $5 million we might think would be required to start up this program and put that into affordable housing, or even the $100,000.
Councillor Van Holst, Councillor Van Holst, I apologize. I'm going to interrupt, but I want to clarify. You made a comment. I think I just heard that 100,000 would go into administration. If you meant expenses for a survey, so be it. But I don't think you meant that the monies associated with a survey would go back towards administration per se. You might wish.
No. It's in the table, table 1, it said 2 million goes to revenue and is the revenue, and the other ongoing costs are in brackets there, administration. So that's what we're most of that funds goes to run the program. And we're although it's mostly pays for itself, we're still sort of expanding our bureaucracy. And I think I prefer to have our staff work on other projects, because we do have a lot of priorities. So I'll support the amendment, but likely vote against the main motion, or at least the part B, if you would kindly split that out for me. Thank you.
Noted. Thank you very much. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I want to thank staff for the report. I found it to be a very good read. And I was back and forth on this one as well. I wasn't sure where to go, and really appreciate the information. I know comparing the City of London to other municipalities like Vancouver and Toronto may not necessarily be the right way. Obviously, Vancouver is the only one that really does have the data on it. But I do think that this is sort of starting the conversation on in the city and coming up with our own plan. And for us to come up with our own plan and looking at opportunities to create more housing, residential housing, is something that we should be doing. At AMO, the board of directors had a very long conversation on affordable housing and opportunities for all municipalities to have available to them. And this was one that was mentioned to be able to tax properties that are not occupied. But I think that leads to the bigger conversation, as was mentioned by my colleague, about where is the vacant commercial, what are the challenges around Airbnbs in our city that really is not part of this. But we do need some kind of a solution, another tool, I guess, for housing. And I'll be supporting this as much as I have concerns around it.
I don't see any other speakers. I do. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to take an opportunity to speak to the amendment now and to, through you, just share a couple of comments on concerns that I've heard raised. And I actually said this at committee on the main motion as well. Well, it's all well and good to talk about the importance of, how many tiny homes, or how many more affordable units could we build with $100,000 or $5 million. I think it's really important that we all keep in mind that this council, and people should take some pride in this. And I know, and I've said this before, it feels like we're treading water, but we've put $90 million of new investment into combating homelessness and developing more affordable housing in the city. It's been a tremendous investment, and it's been the issue that has united us all. And I think for good reason, because we all recognize that it's a problem and we all care about finding a solution. But when we've put in that level of money and still feel like we're treading water, I think it is incumbent upon us to look at what other tools may be necessary. It's not just going to solve itself by continuing to put money into new builds. There has to be a look at how the existing inventory is operating out there on the market. And through you, Chair, I'll share with all colleagues and to Councillor Turner's point, and I don't mean to speak for staff on this. I'm not sure if Mr. Katolik is here or not, but I believe we will be getting the report back on licensing of short-term rental accommodations either in March or April's committee cycle. That's something that Councillor Hopkins and I both raised back in 2019, and while it has been a little while in coming, I believe we're going to see that in the weeks ahead too, which, to Councillor Turner's point, will be another tool that we can look at and consider in terms of how that may free up some units that are being used as short-term stock right now rather than long-term stock. There's a number of challenges facing us on the housing file. Of course, we've got work to do in our own London community housing as well, in terms of getting vacancies down and units restored so people can occupy them. There's a whole gamut of challenges here. I think that getting an assessment of the scope of the vacancy problem in the private residential market in our city right now is a good first step, as our city treasurer indicated. And I really hope that colleagues will support getting the data on this, because to Councillor Lehman's point and to others who have said it, we aren't Toronto or Vancouver or even Ottawa. We are a different market. We're not a capital city, and we are not a city near a large body of water, where we don't have a major port into the community. So there are some differences between us and some of the communities that have implemented this already, but I think getting a better handle on the scope of the problem is an important step. And I think Councillor Turner is right as well, that it may be data that we can put to use and put our thinking caps on to apply in other directions too. So I do hope colleagues will support this at the end of the day, and I just want to extend my thanks both to Ms. Barbone for her help in this, as well as to Councillor Cassidy. I really appreciate we've had a few conversations since the original Corporate Services Committee agenda came out about how to deal with this, and I appreciate being able to work with her on that. So I'll conclude my comments with that, Your Worship.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the Deputy Mayor to take the chair, please.
Yes, and I'll go to the mayor.
Thanks very much. Colleagues, this came up at committee and was discussed extensively. You heard references tonight to homelessness and affordable housing, as we heard at committee. And that is an issue and are issues that we as a council have embraced to take seriously. We all get that, and we understand what that means. What I'm trying to understand, though, as I see this massaged motion, how it gets us to where we need to be to deal with issues around homelessness and affordable housing. Listen, data is always good. It's always helpful to have that information, but it comes at a cost. And when I look at what we're intending to do here and the perspective and potential outcomes of this, you know, I think if we're trying to use this data for the purpose of understanding affordable housing and how that can assist us, this doesn't do that. From my standpoint, you need incentives to create affordable housing, not punitive measures. And ultimately, where this would go, and it's the unspoken words in this motion in terms of its, I will say, logical conclusion, is that, and certainly part of the discussion in committee was the issue of surtaxing vacant homes. I think here we're identifying a solution that's looking for a problem. And from my standpoint, I think when Councillor Turner made the reference to issues around vacancy, and we talk more in his comments around the issues of commercial vacancies. I think we all get that, and we understand that there's a need to understand and deal with that issue because it's rampant in our city, and I don't think that is helpful. So from my standpoint, there are a lot of things with this motion that don't really round out terms of reference. How long does a home have to be vacant before it's considered vacant? I think we're right that that we are not a Toronto nor a Vancouver, because there was a lot of speculation on housing as a result of their geography and the draw of immigration to this country and the draw as a regional center. What we've seen in London of late is the fastest growing city in all of Ontario. And we grew some 10% in the last 5 years. And so to me, I don't see it, I don't see this study as a way to get us where we want to be. If the issue is to discuss homelessness, absolutely. To discuss housing affordability, absolutely. I think we are all moved by that, those issues. But to imagine that this will be that this tool, quote unquote, will be the one that gives us the information that we need to act, I don't see that. Again, someone that owns a home that happens to be vacant for any reason, for any period of time, can you imagine that that is going to turn into affordable housing? I don't see it. So with the deepest of respect, I will not support the amendment. The balance of the items on 2.2 are absolutely reasonable to support. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thanks. Councillor Cassidy's on the list, and I'll return the chair to the mayor.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I will jump in now. Just to say that a number of the concerns that have been raised about what is a vacant, what would be considered a vacant home, and what will, this discrepancy in the number of homes that have been identified, whether it's 54 or 700 and something, those are all reasons to proceed with the RFP. Those are the very reasons to go ahead and seek the information and the data that we're looking for to then decide whether or not to move forward with a vacant home tax or some other option, some other way of addressing a problem if a problem is identified. There has been discussion about whether or not this will provide incentive for people to then open the property up for affordable housing or housing at all if it's just sitting vacant. I think that the point is that it could be, and as it is in other jurisdictions, it could be an incentive for some. It could be a source of revenue for other properties, source of revenue for the city for other properties. And we could use that revenue towards affordable housing programs or homelessness prevention programs or other such housing related programs. So there are a variety of possibilities if City Council chooses at some point in the future to go ahead with a vacant home tax. The other thing is, what problem is this seeking to solve? There are a number of problems. It is not just about affordable housing. It is also about possibly some of the issues that come forward with these problem homes that sit vacant. But again, this is what the data is supposed to help us in moving forward and coming to a decision. And the decision may be, okay, the problem is not great enough, or the problem will not be solved in this manner through a vacant home tax, but perhaps some other manner, perhaps in beefed up bylaw enforcement or something like that. And again, to Councillor Turner's points about commercial vacancies, I 100% agree with him on that. And while this is not directly related to that, and while we do not right now, we have been told we do not have tools to adequately address that, I see the possibility of data as a good thing and possibly leading us towards a solution on the commercial vacancies as well. But we really do have to start somewhere, and getting additional data for me is the place to start. So I'm pleased that we tightened up the request or the direction to civic administration through this amendment, and I really hope that City Council will support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other speakers on the issue? Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I hope colleagues will support this step in the process. Just speaking anecdotally, over the years in Ward 4, there have been several properties that have been vacant for very long periods of time. Some of them are in great shape and are well maintained by the owners, and they just sit there totally unused for anything. And it's perplexing on why that's happening. You know, this is a perfectly good residential building. Nobody's in it. It's being maintained properly. People are spending money to look after it, but it's not being used for anyone to live in it. And I'm not talking about for a short period of time. I'm talking for years where it's been left vacant. In many other cases, unfortunately, what happens with these vacant properties is they're not very well maintained and they start to become huge problems on the street. And you can imagine on a street, say you've got 45 or 50 homes in a densely packed residential street, you know, one or two of them are vacant. It starts to become a big problem on the street. And again, they tend not to be short-term vacancies. They tend to be longer-term vacancies. And obviously that is an issue around property standards. But the reason it becomes a property standards issue is because the owner leaves it empty at the beginning. And I think the idea of a tax on vacant homes is worth looking at, because for those problems, you know, we can avoid all the property standards issues and the problems that come with that in neighborhoods. We can create more housing in the sense that now it's available and on the market instead of empty by putting in that disincentive at the beginning and making it more expensive for owners to leave them empty. And so I do think there's value in looking at it. Unfortunately, you know, this is not a small problem. I know personally of like, I don't know, half a dozen houses in Ward 4 where this has been an issue for many years, multiple different locations, different property owners. It's not a very small issue. I think it's actually fairly big. And for the people who live in the area, you can imagine it can become a huge problem. So I think we need to look at it. I think this is a good step. It is a tough one to get a hold of, you know, and I think the anonymous utility data is probably the best way. That's when you know something's really vacant, is when there's no power really being used or no water. You can get a good sense of it. And I think having somebody look at it to give us a sense of the scope, so it's not just anecdotal, but we can get some real data behind it, is a good step forward.
Thank you very much. I see no other speakers. So with that, we are voting on the amendment, which has been duly moved and seconded. With that, I'll call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 13-2.
We have all of item 2.2. Councillor Lewis, do you want to walk us through that?
I will now put the main motion as amended on the floor, and that will be to receive the report. Section B is the piece that we just amended, and then of course for civic administration to continue to monitor the outcomes in other municipalities as well. So I'll move the entire motion as amended now. And I believe there's a request for B to be called separately by some individuals. So if the clerks can do that.
Let's just find out. Councillor Van Holst, did you have?
Yes, please, if you kindly pull B, and I would say a couple things to the main motion.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are dealing now with the amended motion, but with all but B. So with that, any comments on all but B? For that, we need a mover and a seconder. I'm sorry for that. I have Councillor Fife Miller, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Thank you very much. So we're voting on the amended motion, but it is all but B, which is the amendment. But so with that, we will call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
And I will now put Part B as amended on the floor.
Thanks very much. There's been fulsome discussion. Any other comments on this? We'll look for, that's been put on the floor by Councillor Lewis. We'll look for a seconder. Councillor Hillier. Discussion, Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. So again, I think I'll vote against this. It is $100,000 and we're basically asking somebody to count the empty houses. I'm thinking that later this year, we're going to have a bunch of candidates knocking on the door. Maybe we should just ask them to tell us if they encounter an empty house. I don't see this as a great project for us to be taking on. So I think I'm going to again vote against this one and stick to what was our staff recommendation. I think I'd prefer to let the other cities that are looking into this come up with the other ideas that we may be able to do. And I don't know this data is going to be that helpful because we know most of the properties that are causing the big problems already. So thank you.
Thank you. I see no other speakers on the list. With that, let's call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 11-4.
Councillor Lewis.
That concludes the third report of your Corporate Services Committee, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Now with the third report of Civic Works, I'll call on Councillor Pelosi, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. All votes were unanimous at committee, and I have not been given notice to pull anything separate.
Thank you. Does anyone wish anything dealt with separately? I see none. Councillor Pelosi, any sum up?
Great committee meeting as always. Talk about the drinking water system and how everything was in, no irregularities there. Wastewater treatment, Oregon Rankin for waste, and that the Victoria Bridge replacement being item 2.6 has been brought forward to avoid conflicts in construction with the Wellington BRT corridor.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I see none. We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Councillor Pelosi.
And that concludes the third report of the Civic Works Committee.
Thank you very much. Now for the third report of Planning and Environment, I'll call on Councillor Hopkins, please. Oh, excuse me. We have, according to this here, no, we do have the third report of Planning and Environment. Councillor Hopkins, please.
Your Worship, I had Sppc in front of planning, but if you'd like me to go forward with the two planning reports before the third report of Sppc, I can do that.
I appreciate that. I just conferred with the clerk. We're still going to proceed with Planning Environment if you're ready, Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, yes, and I'm happy to put forward the third meeting report of the Planning and Environment Committee. I just want to bring to everyone's attention, I've heard from no one to pull anything, and just want to make a few comments around our meeting. We had a presentation on housekeeping amendment to our secondary plans.
Okay, before we do that, then why don't we just determine if anyone wishes any item dealt with separately on the third report of Planning and Environment, if we could, please. Back over to you, Councillor Hopkins. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We held a number of public participation meetings, 4 of them. One in particular was the amendment, rezoning amendment to allow a kennel at Westmount Mall. We also referred the secondary plan as an item of direction for Meadow Lily Road area. There was no decision on a referral back to review and for consideration in the development of a special area policy for Meadow Lily Road South. It was a tied vote, so therefore no decision was made. And with that, that is my report.
Thanks very much. Any comments or questions from colleagues? I see none. We will call the vote. Yep. Did I have a question? Councillor Turner, you snuck in there. Thank you.
Very sneaky. Thank you, Your Worship. Just really quickly, I wanted to thank the committee for hearing the concerns of the neighborhood on 345 Simcoe, or sorry, 345 Sylvan Street, and this will be much needed affordable housing for the community and for the neighborhood. There were the concerns that we heard were largely site plan in nature, and those recommendations have been incorporated by the committee and passed on to for site plans. So looking forward to seeing this move forward. I think those amendments will be very helpful in addressing those concerns, and I think it's a good project to see for us in our, as we talked earlier about affordable housing. This is one of those movements that this council has been able to accomplish.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the third report of planning environment.
Councillor Van Holst. Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Colleagues with the order because of Sppc, but I'm actually going to now go to the fourth report of planning environment and turn it back over to you, Councillor Hopkins, if I could, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to put on the floor the fourth report of the Planning and Environment Committee. I've heard from no one to pull any items, so I would like to put all items on the floor.
Thank you very much. Does anyone wish any item dealt with separately? Any other comments, Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, it, as always, is a interesting and busy committee to chair. We received information on the 2021 annual development report, had a discussion around that. There were a number, 3 public participation meetings. For me, good news with one of our public participation meetings with the Victoria, the old hospital lands with the affordable housing coming into play. It wasn't a zoning amendment conversation. We've already done that, but it was more a site plan conversation. So some good news there. Items for direction, inclusionary zoning, good discussion, presentation from staff on that, and supported the recommendation to receive the inclusionary zoning review and to request the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to consider London's assessment report in evaluating the potential for and feasibility for inclusionary zoning on a citywide basis. So with that, that is my report.
Thank you. Do colleagues have any other comments or questions? Councillor Turner, as opposed to not being sneaky, I found you straight away.
Well, I'm right there. Thank you, Worship. So I just wanted to make a couple comments, one with respect to inclusionary zoning, the second with the building report. And third, with respect to the Old Victoria Hospital lands. First, the inclusionary zoning, I think this is an important letter to be sending to the province, so we'll see if they listen. They have indicated and spent a lot of time talking about how they want to advance the construction of housing. The reality is in London, our biggest need is in the affordable housing sector. And this is one way to help accomplish that. But so far, what I've seen from the province seems to be not so much focused on the affordable sector, but rather housing writ large in order to address concerns and issues that are predominantly in the GTHA. The loss of the ability to do inclusionary zoning on a citywide basis and left to the primary major transit corridors is very restrictive for us. I draw your attention to the London plan, which actually has a goal of 25% of all new housing to be affordable. The building report identifies that we built 4,000 units last year, or issued 4,000 building permits, or permits for 4,000 units. If we had applied that 25% standard, that would have been 1,000 affordable units within the city, but that's not what we accomplished. And bonusing we have used as a moderate tool to be able to accomplish some extra affordable housing units within existing developments. And I think it's really important. And this is one of the big advantages of inclusionary zoning, is that it integrates affordable housing within property development. It doesn't segregate affordable housing, it incorporates it. And if we're going to be a city that's inclusive and diverse, then we need to be able to make sure that the way we build our housing is inclusive and diverse. And inclusionary zoning helps us to accomplish that. So bonusing has net us about 53 units a year. As I said, that's in fair stark contrast to the 1,000 units a year. Now that said, 53 units isn't all the affordable housing we've built. We've actually built a lot more than that. But we've got a long road to go. Our goal of 25% is a hard one to achieve, which segues really nicely into the South Street Hospital lands. The proposal that we had a chance to see looks phenomenal. It's a great example of collaboration, a wonderful consortium that mixes market rate and significant amounts of affordable housing. When we heard the applications and did the approvals for the south side of South Street, there wasn't any affordable housing incorporated into that. And I was concerned about the north side of the street because it was very key to the area plan and the discussions to make sure that we didn't get into a gentrification situation. That still may occur, but I think the risk is much lower with the way that it's being proposed to be developed. That's very complementary to the neighborhood, and it was very much driven by the community. The secondary plan for South Street Hospital lands was a very strong community collaboration, and it's a great example of mid-scale development. And you hear a lot about the missing middle. This is the personification. Well, it's not even the personification, but the clear example of what that is and what it can be. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the shovels get on the ground, especially with the preservation of two significant heritage assets in the Medical Science Services Building and the War Memorial Children's Hospital. So well done, and I'm very excited.
Thank you. I'll call on the Deputy Mayor, please.
Yes, and I'll go to the mayor.
Thanks very much. Colleagues, the reference to inclusionary zoning was brought up by Councillor Turner, certainly a big item that was dealt with. I'd like to thank staff for the tremendous work that they have done with respect to this issue. For the benefit of the public, what happens is we've lost bonusing, which is our ability to grant certain considerations to the development community and builders to allow for units based on affordable housing. And that particular process has been eliminated. And so that gives us the only option as it relates to inclusionary zoning. You heard Councillor Turner make reference to the need for the province to work with London, and it is my intention to speak directly to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing and to the Premier on this issue. It's that important for our city. I think this was a made in GTA kind of policy where the PTMSAs are prevalent, and so the notion of really strong infill and higher density in those areas is significant. That is not the case in London. And so as a result, the need, I believe, and you've heard Councillor Turner affirm, for us to have that flexibility in inclusionary zoning is absolutely critical. It will be one of the priorities I take forward, and I'm hopeful, because in politics you have to be a little bit optimistic, and that's part of the world we live in, but I intend to take that to the provincial government to determine, on behalf of council, to ensure that that London is certainly heard, and we'll see where that goes. I'll be happy to report back to council any success. If it's not successful, I may not report it back, but if we are successful, I'll be extremely happy to share that with you all. So I wanted to make that as a reference point and thank Councillor Turner for speaking to it and for the great support that the committee provided, and staff for doing the great work. Thank you.
Thanks, and I'll return the chair to the mayor.
I see no one else on the agenda. So with that, for the fourth report of Planning and Environment Committee, let's call the question.
Councillor Helmer? Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thank you. And since I've confused you all, I'm now which is the third report of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee, and calling the Deputy Mayor, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. For the third report of SPPC, there are a number of colleagues who have declared conflicts, so we will deal with three. Item 3, item 8, and item 11 separately. Item 12 had a divided vote, so I think it's probably appropriate to deal with that separately too. I believe everything else was by consensus, so I would be happy to move the balance. So that's everything except item 3, 8, 11, and 12.
Does anyone wish any item to be dealt with separately for voting purposes? I see none, so what we will be doing is voting on all items in this SPPC report except items 3, 5, 8, 11, and 12. If I have that right, Deputy Mayor?
You do, Your Worship, and there are significant items in this batch. We have the draft Climate Emergency Action Plan, which was debated extensively, as well as a London for Everyone, the plan to disrupt Islamophobia too.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hopkins, did you wish to have anything dealt with separately?
Just to make a comment before we proceed to vote.
Absolutely. Go ahead. You're on the list.
On 4.2, which is the draft climate emergency plan.
Okay, we'll vote on these other items with the exception of those pulled, and then we will we'll hear your comments on 4.2 right now.
Right now, thank you, Your Worship, because we will be voting on it, and I would like to just make my comments. I want to thank the committee for it was a great conversation that we had. It was a long conversation, an important conversation. I really do want to reach out and mention how well done this report was, and thank staff. It was thorough, it was lengthy. The presentation, there's a lot more to be done. The consultation with the community, we are going to be doing a public participation meeting on April the 4th. To me, that is just the beginning of the conversation that we're going to have, and the collaboration. I think everyone around the horseshoe understands we need a roadmap, and this is the beginning of that. And just want to again thank staff and the committee, and looking forward to the community engagement as we start the process. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other speakers on all of the items with the exception of those that have been pulled. And seeing none, we will call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Deputy
Yes, and I just want to check with the clerks because I read the vote there, and I just want to make sure that we did the right ones. I don't think I pulled the a London for Everyone plan, but I think it got pulled from that list. Is that correct?
I did ask the clerk, and I apologize. I should have made that public because I did want to speak to it, not having been at the meeting. I apologize, Deputy Mayor.
No problem. You can't slide one past me if it's a vote. I will go then in order due to the conflicts. So I believe Councillor Lehman had a conflict on item 3, which is 4.1. So I'm happy to put that on the floor. This is the strategy to reduce core area vacancy.
Any comments or questions? I see none. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 14-0 with 1 recuse.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, next is the item you wanted pulled, Your Worship, item 5, which is 4.3, a London for Everyone, an action plan to disrupt Islamophobia. I'm happy to put that on the floor.
Thank you very much. I'd like to speak to it if I could, please, and then turn it back to you, Deputy Mayor.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, colleagues, I was not in attendance at the last SPPC meeting. A health issue precluded me, but were I at that meeting, there are a few things I would have said, and I'll be brief, but I think it is important to be said. And I am confident that I am speaking actually on behalf of all members of council as we acknowledge and recognize Romina Morris, our City Director of Anti-Racism and Anti-Oppression, for the obvious amount of care and compassion that went into this report. It was an enormous responsibility. You've all come through on behalf of all Londoners. Similarly, I'd like to thank members of the London Muslim community, along with representatives from community-based and public sector organizations, for lending their voices and their support to what's being presented before us tonight. Look, what happened the evening of June 6, 2021 was London's darkest hour. From that moment onward, there could be no question racism existed in our city. There could be no question that hatred had managed to take root, and there was no way to deny we were somehow immune to the potential for deadly violence. So from that moment on, the only question that mattered was, how do we heal, and how do we work with our Muslim community to ensure that this type of thing would never happen again? Well, those were the questions that informed our community's response in the immediate aftermath, when we all grieved together and when we comforted each other. And those same questions now inform the policy-driven, community-led response before us tonight. We must be clear. This represents the start of our work, not the end. Our commitment and our resolve must be as strong today and as strong years from now as it was in the hours and days after the attack. Perhaps above all else, the love and dignified grace which I believe to be at the core of these recommendations are an absolutely fitting tribute to the Afzaal family who personified these traits and whose memories we honor and cherish. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll return the chair to the mayor. I have no one else on the speaker's list.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? Then with that, colleagues, let's call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Yes, the next is item 8, 4.6, which is an appointment to the London Downtown Business Association. Councillor Lehman declared a conflict on this item. I'm happy to put this on the floor.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? I see none. Let's call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 14-0 with one recuse.
Yes, next is the seventh report of the governance working group. There are a couple of items on there that had divided votes. No, just one. So within item 4.9, there were items A through VI. A and B, and A had subcomponents. Councillor Van Meerbergen wanted VI, which is the component on childcare, where that committee was being dissolved, voted on separately. So I think that's probably the easiest one to deal with first, if the clerks are prepared to deal with it that way. The other component was A 1 and 2 had divided votes on it, so I could call A 1 and 2 separately. And then the rest we could all just do as a batch. It was all unanimous. So if the clerks have that, they can queue up whatever order they're prepared for. I'm not one to get ahead of what they've planned.
So to be clear, Deputy Mayor, you're talking about under 4.9, A, numbers 3, 4, and 5, and B.
Yeah, that would be the things that everybody had consensus on. So I'm happy to put that on the floor first.
Any comments or questions on those specific items, excluding 4.9A, 1 and 2, and 6? It's always fun when we put the clerks through some hoops like this. I'm sure they think it's fun as well. So when they're ready, we will proceed with those specific items. For the benefit of the public, we're just
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Deputy Mayor.
Yes, so next I can put parts A1 and A2 on. This is the approval of the new terms of reference for London Community Advisory Committees. Part 2 is with the approval of those, the recruitment of members to fill those committees. So I'm happy to put that on the floor.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions? I see none. We will call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 12-3.
Yes, the final item in this section is A6, which Councillor Van Meerbergen declared a conflict on. This is the dissolution or the dissolving of the Child Care Advisory Committee at their request.
Comments or questions? Let's call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 13-1 with 1 recuse.
Anything on that particular SPPC report left, Deputy Mayor?
Yes, I believe I also called 12, which is 4.10 separate, which was the motion on the a referral to the governance working group on the role of a counselor as part-time, full-time, unique. It was a divided vote, so I'm happy to put this on the floor separately as well.
Thank you very much. Comments or questions? I see none. We will call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 11-4.
Deputy Mayor, anything else on that?
PPC, I believe I've got it all now.
Okay, thank you. Well, just in the spirit of carrying on, almost in the order we started, we are at 8.7, the first report of the Audit Committee. Deputy Mayor, would you present the report, please?
Yes, colleagues, I'm happy to report or present the report of the Audit Committee. I will put all the items on the floor for consideration. I don't know if colleagues have any questions. What I will note for colleagues is there was a great introduction to our new auditors, MNP. They brought their team along, and the Audit Committee got to have a conversation with them, get to know who we will be working with on behalf of council over the next couple of years. And so it was a good introduction, a good back and forth. And as you know, the auditors do have that direct relationship with the Audit Committee. And so, so I just would draw your attention to that. And I put the whole report on the floor for colleagues' approval.
Other comments or questions with respect to the Audit Committee report? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just wish to extend our thanks to Deloitte, who have been our internal auditors for the last 4 years, and a lot of great work done, and a lot of excellent cooperation with and from our staff too. So I think it was, as I look back at the reviews that were done, it was many tweaks and suggestions, but very, very solid performance from our staff prior. So there's the city, I believe, is running very well, and I thank our staff for all the work that they've done in that regard.
Nicely said on both counts. Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, so it was a good meeting. We had a good discussion. I'd like to thank our previous auditors or outgoing auditors and welcome the new ones. It's been great to work with them, and this is now 7 years sitting on Audit Committee and going into 8 is what Council may recall is that we made a shift from kind of value for money audits into kind of our exposures and liabilities, and take a look at processes and from our external audit perspective. And that's borne a lot of fruit because it's taken a look at best practices, made a lot of really good recommendations, and helped to align the internal practices of the corporation to be as efficient as possible. The internal audit dashboard and and summary provided some really good of the indicators, those financial indicators that you take a look at to see what the health of the organization is. And they paint a good picture against a number of our peers. The City of London performs quite well on those. And especially when we take a look at our debt management and our assets, we're a pretty stable and solid city. And there's a bit of a trope that that cities take on too much debt, that they don't spend money wisely. Our audits and summaries show that that's not the case. We actually do quite well. So I highlight that one for council. If you hadn't had a chance to get right into the minutia of the audit report, the internal audit summary provides some of those really good, really at a glance indicators. And second, for the community to just reaffirm that this is a city that knows what it's doing in terms of its financial management and its course to make sure that there's the best value for money for the residents of our city.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? I see none. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thank you very much. Deputy, for one more item, and that is the special Sppc meeting that was held this evening prior to council, please.
Yes, as colleagues recall from just a couple of hours ago, the fourth report of Sppc had one item on it, the Streamlining Development Approval Fund Transfer Payment Agreement. I'm happy to put the approvals that we unanimously agreed on at that committee before council for approval.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Seeing none, we will call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Colleagues, there are no deferred matters, but I'm aware of an inquiry that's come through. Councillor Hopkins, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Given the confusion that may still remain in the community and the number of inquiries councillors may have, I'd like to ask staff for further clarification on the process that has allowed for the permit to be granted to the Reptilia establishing operations at Westmount. Through you, Worship, I would like to go to staff to give us further clarification.
Thank you very much. Would I turn that over to Mr. Kotsovas?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Through your worship. So let me provide a bit of history and where we are today with this this file. I want to say though that they are not currently operating anywhere, but there have been certain approvals that have been issued, and I want to clarify as to how those may have come about. So you may recall back in December of 2018, we prepared a report to the the Community Protective Services Committee. The report was actually with respect to zoos and mobile zoos. It wasn't specific to this proponent. It was a general report. However, part of that report did address the interest of Reptilia to locate in London. As part of that report, there was a planning analysis that was provided regarding a proposed adaptive reuse of an existing commercial building for a place of entertainment. The planning analysis concluded that the proposal was consistent with the provincial policy statement, the London plan, and zoning as a place of entertainment, and provided for an opportunity to contribute to the vitality and regeneration of the city. Additionally, the report addressed compliance with the animal control bylaw. So there's the planning analysis, but it also had to address the the animal control bylaw. The bylaw itself provided for an exemption of these types of organizations and operations where they are either licensed by a municipal government or another government authority. Staff at the time had recommended that the municipality license these operations and recommended an amendment that staff be directed to draft an amendment to the business license bylaw to regulate these businesses. Council did not support the amendment and received the report. So with no municipal...
Yeah.
Is it about to happen?
Yeah, there's just a couple items here before me.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, back to the blue. What do you want me to do? What should I do?
It seems we have a group chat here. Just bear with us a moment, colleagues.
Sorry. Is it okay to proceed?
Yep, please. Yeah, please proceed, Mr. Kotzfis.
Okay, so with no municipal license scheme at that time and no other government license, I believe the perception was that the Reptilia could not operate in London. However, since that time, a minor variance was approved to increase the floor area for a place of entertainment at Westmount Mall. I believe it went from a 10% to a 16%, so 6% increase. And also a building permit was applied for under the Building Code Act. And under that legislation, the CBO shall issue a permit unless it contravenes applicable law. So the animal control bylaw is not applicable under the building code, but zoning is. So they did have zoning, but it does not, but the animal control bylaw does not come into play for the issuance of a building permit. From an operational perspective, we now understand that Reptilia intends to operate under a provincial license. Again, not a municipal license, but a provincial license. The terms of that license would be held by the province. And once they are open and operating, enforcement of those terms and conditions of that license will be the responsibility of the province. Any allegations of nonconformity could be subject to a provincial investigation. However, any matters outside of their license, they could still be subject to the city's animal control bylaw. But that, again, that would be determined at that time, depending on what they are doing and how they are operating and how the provincial investigation is concluded. I believe that is basically how we came to where we are today. If there's anything further that I could provide, I would be pleased to do so.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kotzfis. Councillor Hopkins, any other direct specific question? Does that answer the question you've asked?
Yes, I understand through an inquiry I can ask a question and want to thank staff for the further clarification around Reptilia setting up at Westmount. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not aware of any other inquiries. Councillor Van Holst?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I submitted an inquiry.
I apologize, Councillor Van Holst, I apologize. I recognize now that you did, and I just missed that. I'm sorry.
That's no trouble, Your Worship. On the weekend, I came downtown and noticed that some streets around City Hall were blocked off by snowplows. And so my inquiry was just, what was the reason for doing so, and what's the cost for that sort of an operation?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll take that to Ms. Livingston, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, that activity was part of our operational planning for the weekend, and I do not have the cost information at this time.
Thank you very much. So that takes us to item 12, colleagues, which is emergent motions. There is one item under emergent motions I've been made aware, Councillor Cassidy, with respect to a proclamation request regarding International Day of the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. For us to consider the emergent motion, I would be looking for a mover and seconder for leave, which would be required. Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Hamou. Thank you very much. We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
I'll now turn to Councillor Cassidy, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and received a proclamation request to declare an annual day of action against anti-Asian racism. We did make the same proclamation last year, and we have a requirement for a 6-week deadline to put in an application for a proclamation request. Applicants don't always meet that deadline, but in this case, these applicants have met the deadline. The problem is that the proclamation date is March 21st, but because of Family Day and spring break, our next council meeting is not until March 22nd. So we will not have another opportunity to approve this proclamation request. So that is the motion that I'm putting forward, that that based on the application from Lennon and Middlesex Local Immigration Partnership, March 21st, 2022 be proclaimed International Day of the Elimination of Racial Discrimination.
And you have a seconder for that, please? Oh, I just saw first Councillor Hamou, thank you. Comments or questions, colleagues? I see none, let's call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
And thank you, Councillor Cassidy. So with that, for the benefit of our viewers, we are going to go through a number of bylaws to review and vote on. And then we will move into closed session. Coming out of closed session, we will report out, and then a couple more bylaws to be dealt with. But for now, colleagues were dealing with bills number 90 through 121 inclusive, and for that, I'll look for a mover and a seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Pelosa, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. Thank you. We'll call the vote.
Councillor Turner. Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
For mover and seconder for second reading of bills 90 through 121, Councillor Van Meerbergen moves, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Any discussion? I see none, we'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thank you. Third reading enactment of bills 90 through 121. I'll look for a mover and seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Hamou, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Let's call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thank you. In a moment, a motion to go into closed session, but I'll turn to the clerk and ask the clerk to advise the public for the reasons why we're going into closed session.
Your Worship, the matters to be dealt with in closed session are 5 matters that are outlined on the Public Council agenda. Those are a solicitor-client privilege matter regarding 220 Wellington Road South, solicitor-client privileged advice related to various personal injury and property damage claims against the city, a matter pertaining to an identifiable individual, a matter related to litigation currently before the Superior Court of Justice, and a matter related to the security of municipal property. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with that, I will look for a mover and a second to go into closed session. Moved by Councillor Fife Miller, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Let's call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Remind the public that we will return from closed session on completion, and I'll ask colleagues for their forbearance for a few moments as we make the conversion. Thank you.